Welcome to Spokane Talks.
News, views,
And conversation.
Welcome to Spokane Talks, where you find news, views, and conversation that includes respect for opinions, facts, and diversity. Spokane Talks is brought to you in part by McNeese Wheeler Attorneys, Ponderosa Republican Women, and Rana Paint.
On this episode, I'll have an opportunity to sit down in business talks with Neil Bowling, station manager of KHQ, to discuss the opportunities and challenges in the broadcasting business. Then, on She Says with Stephanie Regulato, the CEO of the YWCA will discuss domestic violence in our community, followed by Ed 101, bringing awareness and education to type 1 diabetes.
Ponderosa Republican Women is a club with members that come from every part of Spokane County. Although they differ in age, occupation, ethnic background, and cultural heritage, these women and many men stand together to promote government based on conservative principles, discover lifelong friendships, meet elected officials and candidates, hear challenging speakers, receive campaign training, and learn about the electoral process. Our meetings take place on the second Thursday of every month. Follow Ponderosa Republican Women on Facebook for more information.
Welcome to Business Talks. I'm Ryan McNeese, and we're in the studio with Neil Bowling, station manager at KHQ. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Ryan.
Neil, you have an interesting backstory. Grew up in Tampa, Florida, and have made your way via Tennessee to Spokane, Washington, to
That's
our
right.
market, and now as the station manager. Let's talk about some of the opportunities and challenges in the broadcast business. What are you seeing right now in our industry?
Well, I think that in terms of opportunities, I mean, there's never been a greater hunger for local news and information. People just crave that. The challenge that's related to that is they want it on their terms.
Right.
Sometimes they don't necessarily want to watch a commercial. They don't know if they want to pay for the news, but they know that they want it. And you've got Facebook, which is such a humongous driver to website traffic, but Facebook is always changing the game so that they can make money off of it. So you're dependent on this platform, and you're essentially enriching that platform in order to try to continue getting the referrals back to your website. So it's this kind of vicious circle that that I'm not too keen on. I would rather take control of our own destiny and not rely on Facebook. But I think I heard something Mark Zuckerberg recently said, well, if broadcasters don't want to play it our way, we won't hold their hand through hospice. Which was a pretty strong comment, that he saw us on the precipice. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. We're feeding the public's knowledge for news and information. We're curating the best content on the network level. You're not wasting your time with the millions of choices now that you have on Netflix or Amazon Prime.
Well, as you've indicated, there are a lot of choices, but I think a laudable goal that KHQ has been successful with is good local community content, which, as we've talked about before, you can choose national broadcast, etc. But if you're going to do that, sometimes you're not seeing both sides of the equation, and I think that's important. I think Q does that.
Yes, we work very hard to provide balance. I may have mentioned to you that I feel like if we get complaints from both sides, right or left, that we've indicated a bias, I feel pretty good about it because we're balanced. If we're only getting the way to go exposing that leftist scheme or vice versa, then I feel that we have not done our jobs today.
You
as
haven't
journalists.
met the goal.
Right.
Let's take a quick little break and a word from our sponsor and come right back chatting with Neil Bowling.
Ponderosa Republican Women is a club with members that come from every part of Spokane County. Although they differ in age, occupation, ethnic background, and cultural heritage, these women and many men stand together to promote government based on conservative principles, discover lifelong friendships, meet elected officials and candidates, hear challenging speakers, receive campaign training, and learn about the electoral process. Our meetings take place on the second Thursday of every month. Follow Ponderosa Republican Women on Facebook for more information.
Welcome back to Business Talks. Neil Bowling, Station Manager at KHQ. Thanks, Neil. As we've been discussing, the challenge is really, and I think Q has done a good job of this, is meeting local content, good content directed at our community versus some of the national and negative content that potentially sells.
Right.
What are some of the phrases that are in the industry in terms of negative content does sell?
Well, the one you most often hear is "if it bleeds, it leads," right?
Yep.
The president, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, so to speak, you have to admit that he is a polarizing figure and that he gathers attention. I've never seen anyone dominate the news cycle like the president of the United States. And it's tempting to fall into that trap of feeding that beast, trying to just constantly provide that. It's harder, and yet it's more satisfying when you can provide the balance, when you can provide the perspective. I've heard the expression, art thrives on limitation. That makes the creativity is born out of the limits that you're facing. And I subscribe to that 100%. It's really easy to just, fill holes and take content and plug it into a newscast. It's much harder to be thought-provoking and giving thought to, if you have a story in Moses Lake, how is that going to affect whoever's living in Pullman? And a good producer will try to make, no matter where you live, the person interested and invested in that story.
To make that story relevant.
Exactly.
Yep.
And there's a science behind it, or an art, actually, behind it.
Well, I think it's clear from the ratings, Q has done a good job of that, and with that comes sales and heightened sales. Thank you for continuing to tell the stories in our community.
My pleasure,
I appreciate
Ryan.
you
Thanks
being on
for
the
having
show.
me on.
Thank you. Next up on She Says, host Stephanie Regalado will sit down with the YWCA CEO and discuss domestic violence in our community.
See you tomorrow night, and thanks again for taking care of the painting.
I got this.
Bye.
Weekends are made for painting. Let the experts at Rada Paint take care of you.
Hi. This looks amazing.
Rada Paint, over 80 years of quality, tradition, and trust. Find it in every can.
Welcome to She Says. I'm your host, Stephanie Regalado. I have Regina Malvo with me today, the CEO of YWCA Spokane. Thank you for joining me. You've been
Thanks
here
for having me.
just over 5 years now. What work are you doing? What work is being done through our community, through the YWCA?
Well, really
Spokane?
proud to work for this YWCA. I've
Yeah.
worked for YWCAs for about 15 years.
Okay.
And here in Spokane, our umbrella programs are services for domestic violence victims, children's services, and the Women's Opportunity Center, which is really assistance with job readiness. I think important for the community to know that in our victim support services program, we run the region's 24-hour crisis line. We have free counseling and legal services, both assisting victims with applying for protection orders and helping them walk through that process, as well as free family law assistance. We now offer clinical therapy, both for victims and a child therapist for children. And so just really a holistic set of services for victims. And then, as I said, our Economic Opportunity Center really helps women get jobs and really get back to themselves. And then finally, our children's services include ECAP, which is kind of like the state of Washington's version of Head Start, child therapy, and drop-in child care for kiddos whose moms are accessing our services.
We talked a little bit before about who is affected by domestic violence, and it's not often who some people may assume.
Right. So there are often enormously erroneous stereotypes about who is affected by domestic violence. And what we know is that this issue touches every socioeconomic group, every ethnicity. The distinction is often we know more about those in a lower socioeconomic category because those are the people who more often need to reach out for resources, whereas those who have a lot of resources and oftentimes have more shame don't end up reporting their domestic violence.
But anyone can call your number.
Absolutely. Anyone, not just a victim who might be in trouble, but a loved one or a friend or a coworker who is concerned about someone that they care about, they can call just to get advice on how to speak to and how to support someone who they might be concerned about. We have what we call the 3 R's, which are recognize, respond, refer. So if you see anything that just doesn't feel right, listen to that instinct. Respond by letting the person that you care about know that you see a few things that don't feel quite right, and then refer them to an organization like ours who can help. And as you said, our 24-hour domestic violence helpline is 326-CALL. And then a plethora of information on our website, YWCASpokane.org.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and hear a message from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to talk a little bit more about all the things that you have going on in the future.
Thank you.
The following is sponsored by our friends and community supporters at McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. McNeese Wheeler is a boutique law firm in Spokane, handling matters in both Washington and Idaho. Areas of law include business law, wills, trusts and estates, family law, personal injury and wrongful death, and real estate matters. For your full-service legal needs, contact McNeese Wheeler Attorneys.
Welcome back to She Says. I'm your host, Stephanie Regalado, with Regina Malveaux, CEO of YWCA Spokane. I wanted to quickly address a couple of red flags that people can be very in tune to, because sometimes, you shared a story about a friend, a speaker at one of the Women of Achievement luncheons a few years ago, whose family and friends had no idea of the situation that she was in because she was so guarded from it.
Which is often the case.
But there are some signs. What's the big one?
Absolutely. The big one would be that isolation. So if you see a friend, family member, coworker who really seems to be pulling away from everyone, that's definitely a sign. One of the things also that I said, going back to the recognize, respond, refer, really important when you get to the refer piece. If you see somebody who you have concerns about their safety, really, really encourage them to reach out to our organization. That number again, 326-CALL, and our advocates can safety plan with them. What we know is that when a victim does kind of get the courage to leave, oftentimes that time frame while they're trying to leave is the most dangerous and where it's the most lethal. And so having an opportunity to talk to an advocate who can help them safety plan can really mean the difference literally between life and death. Yeah, absolutely. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You have some exciting things going on. What are those? Well, exciting. We do. Well, in the and actually now in the domestic violence advocate world, we now use the term Domestic Violence Action Month because we really want people to understand that there are actions that they can take. The primary one is becoming educated, and we have this wonderful campaign month-long in all these different spaces with different companies and different communities just to give more information about the issue of domestic violence, we have, I believe, a 30-day campaign with Spokane Public Radio where there will be a new fact and kind of celebrity type every day talking about the work.
Good.
And then we have the Women of Achievement Luncheon, which is our large fundraiser, but also an opportunity to honor about 7 really amazing women in the Spokane community and hear a really compelling speaker who talks about this issue.
Thank you for the work that you're doing in our community as well as the YWCA. We have to skedaddle. YWCA Spokane.org. Thank you for tuning in.
Next up on Ed 101, Eric Wolfram will sit down and discuss and bring awareness to type 1 diabetes.
Welcome to Education 101. I'm your host, Eric Wolfram. Today we're talking about supporting students with type 1 diabetes in the education setting. And with me we've got Michelle Grove, who is the science coordinator at ESD, but also a parent of a type 1 diabetic student. So welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you.
Excellent. So your daughter was diagnosed 7 years ago.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit about what kind of signs there were, and I know that you may have missed as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, it turns out that a lot of the signs and symptoms of type 1 diabetes are things that are easy to explain away.
Right.
Things like thirst. We teach kids to hydrate. She was hydrating like nobody's business.
Absolutely.
Turns out she was filling her own water bottle 4, 5, 6 times a day.
And again, we're talking about a 7-year-old.
A 7-year-old drinking a gallon or 2 of water a day.
So something that size.
Exactly. And that's not a normal amount of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that came more frequent trips to the restroom, which also made sense.
Sure.
She had dry skin, like extremely dry skin, but it was Spokane, it was winter. She had some tummy aches and was eventually had some nausea the day we took her in. I thought she was getting the stomach flu, and it turns out all of those things seemed explainable. None of them said to me, maybe she has a life-threatening illness and she's on the brink of a major emergency.
Right, which is amazing. But you guys were able to finally kind of say there's something wrong, that gut feeling again.
Exactly.
And you went into the doctor's pediatrician office, right? And it was a quick diagnosis.
It was. Within 10 minutes, we had a definitive diagnosis because all they had to do was test 1 drop of blood.
1 drop of blood. And it's easy, right?
It was.
So being able to do that and say, we need to get in there.
Exactly.
And you're going to show me, aren't you?
I am.
So
and it really, we talk a lot. We talk a lot about how test 1 drop should be a standard of care, especially if a child has any symptoms of a stomach illness or anything like that. So, all right, Eric, I'm going to get over here. This might hurt just a little bit, but, imagine that then once you're diagnosed as a 7-year-old, you have to do this 8 to 10 times a day. That becomes your new normal. Take 1 little drop of blood. I'll let you deal with the rest of it. And we wait 3 seconds. And look at you.
Look at that. 129. Is that good?
That is definitely a number that does not concern us at all. Exactly. Now, when Sophie was tested, it wouldn't read on the meter. All it read was high, which meant she was over 600.
Oh, my gosh.
And when,
129 is the norm. So.
And so they said, can you drive to the emergency room or do you need transported? And I was coming in with a kid who just kind of was feeling a little under the weather. I did not imagine that we were heading to the emergency room.
Well, absolutely. And so let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors and then talk about how that affects the education side.
Sounds
great. We'll be right back.
The following is sponsored by our friends and community supporters at McNeese Wheeler Attorneys. McNeese Wheeler is a boutique law firm in Spokane, handling matters in both Washington and Idaho. Areas of law include business law, wills, trusts and estates, family law, personal injury and wrongful death, and real estate matters. For your full-service legal needs, contact McNeese Wheeler Attorneys.
And welcome back to Education 101, talking type 1 diabetes. Let's talk about from an education point of view, because as school starts back up, what do I need to do from an educator's point of view to really support these kids when they're in my classroom?
Right. Well, as with anything, communication is key.
Right.
That is one of the biggest things with the student, with their family, with your school nurse. That student will have a health care plan.
Sure.
But especially if they're newly diagnosed, they may not know yet even how much support they're going to need in the classroom, which is sometimes a big deal.
That is.
But a lot of times kids need to keep things in the classroom. They carry things with them. They test and eat where they are. And we're so lucky in Washington that state law supports that for them too.
Sure,
and so in the classroom, though, we really have to think about things like lockdown situations.
Yes.
In a moment, a low blood sugar can go from a minor urgent need to a full medical emergency if a student doesn't have access to their supplies, to a way to test, things like that.
What are some of those things that we might need to have in the classroom from a teacher's point of view?
Right.
And again, after communicating with
Right.
nurses, with the family.
Absolutely.
What might be something?
One of the most common things would be a quick source of sugar. A
Okay.
child who has a low blood sugar, even if they can't test and they have symptoms of a low blood sugar, they need to have a sugar source. That
And
could
I
be,
know-
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you held up some glucose tablets, or if you kind of show those,
Right.
yeah, those are some of them, right?
Exactly. Those are my daughter's preferred method
Right.
of raising blood sugar. Basically, they're a giant Smartie.
Perfect.
She actually carries Smarties and Starburst and things like that, too. Things that absorb quickly in the body. Honey. She likes honey sticks.
Oh, that's a
Apple
good one.
juice. Things
Right.
like that. Anything that is within a student's dietary plan as well.
Sure,
As far as,
sure.
we always think about allergies and things. But something that they could access that would be quickly absorbed that could avert a potential disaster with a low blood sugar, especially
Right.
especially in a lockdown situation. would
I
be
know
big.
that there's a lot of organizations that can help with that, and I wish we had just a ton of time to be able to continue to talk about this, because I think the key with supporting students with diabetes is communication and planning.
Absolutely.
Communication and planning. And so hopefully everybody can come over to Spokane Talks media.com and be able to see our whole conversation, to see more about all these pieces that you have. So Michelle, thanks for being on Education 101 today.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Eric.
Cindy Huh Baal is a freelance columnist and correspondent for the Spokesman Review and author of War Bonds, Love Stories from the Greatest Generation. The view from her porch is usually sunny.
You think you know someone. You think you can trust them. And then they drive you out into the wilderness and dump you. They peel out of a gravel parking lot, leaving you behind, abandoned like a box of unwanted kittens. It happened to me when I was 9. My parents dropped me off at Silver Lake Bible Camp. Bye, have fun, Mom yelled as she waved out the window. Fun? The camp director swept me along with a group of other abandoned kids and ushered me to a wood frame, un-air-conditioned structure. Rows of bunks lined the wall. This was it. The big house, the hoosecow, the home for unwanted children. The other kids didn't seem to grasp the desperateness of our situation. Giddy girls giggled, vying for bunks. Most seemed to know each other. I didn't know anyone. Finally, there were just 2 of us left. Girls, this is your bunk, Camp Counselor Candy said. Who wants top? I shrugged. My bunkmate threw herself on the bottom bunk, sobbing. Okay, said perpetually perky Candy. Cindy gets top bunk. It was all downhill from there. Things I hated most about camp: arts and crafts, lake swimming, and pig kissing. I've never been a crafty person. I don't color in the lines, and I can never decide how much glue to use for any given project. And really, who the heck needs a macrame wallet? I did love swimming, and I could swim like a fish. I just didn't want to swim with the fish. Which brings me to the pig. The messiest cabin was designated the pig pen, and the inhabitants thereof had to kiss a real live pig at evening chapel. One day, our cabin wasn't up to snuff. Each of us had to pucker up and kiss a slobbering, whiskery, snorting pig. This did not make me feel closer to God. It did make me feel queasy when they served us bacon for breakfast the next morning. For every camp was the best time of my life story, you'll hear a tale like mine, one full of grief, pig kissing, and a lifelong loathing for macrame. And that's the view from my front porch.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Spokane Talks. We'll see you next Sunday at 6 p.m. on Fox for more news, views, and conversation.
See you tomorrow night, and thanks again for taking care of the painting.
I got this.
Bye.
Weekends are made for painting. Let the experts at Rada Paint take care of you.
Hi. This looks amazing.
Rada Paint, over 80 years of quality, tradition, and trust. Find it in every can.
Spokane Talks is about you. Give us your feedback and comments at info@SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Spokane Talks is brought to you in part by McNeese Wheeler Attorneys, Ponderosa Republican Women, and Rada Paint. We'll be back next week with additional news, views, and conversations. Please join us. So long for now.